Hi everyone, my name is Jen. I'm an author and a book reviewer, and I'm here to kickstart my 2023 reading with a reading vlog. And I'm going to do exactly what I did at the beginning of 2022 because I had such a good time last year reading all of the books on the Barbellion Prize Longlist. So I'm going to read that again, obviously they're different books, this year's Barbellion Prize Longlist as the first books that I read this year. That is my plan. The Barbellion Prize is a great prize. It's quite a recent one. I think it was set up maybe 3 or 4 years ago, celebrating work by disabled and chronically ill authors. Also occasionally books by people who have experience of that via those that they are close to but aren't disabled or chronically ill themselves, and that applies to one of the books in this year's long list. So there are 8 books on the long list and I already owned 5 of them and had read 1 of them. I've now purchased the 3 that I didn't already own. I'll be reading all of them in this video, and as always in between reading reviews I will be taking you on some walks around London and also doing some cooking. Basically just a cozy reading vlog. You know the drill if you've been here a while. The turnaround time for this prize is quite tight. So the long list was announced in December. The shortlist is announced at some point this month in January, then the winner is announced in February. I'm going to try and read everything before the shortlist is announced. I didn't manage it last year, but what I did instead was I just avoided looking at what the shortlist was so that I could make personal predictions and then actually react to the shortlist. So maybe that was better. That's probably what will end up happening this year too. We'll see how quickly I can get through everything. So let me show you the books that are on the long list. I'm not going to tell you what the blurbs are or anything like that because I'm going to be talking about all of them as we go. So these are the books that I already owned. We've got 163 Days by Hannah Hodgson, Year of the Tiger by Alice Wong, Recovering Dorothy by Polly Atkin, Chouette by Claire Osketsky, and this is the one I'd already read, so I will recap my review later on in the video. And the last one that I already owned was Head Above Water by Shahd Alshammari. And then the 3 that I didn't already own but now have copies of are Hybrid Humans, Dispatches from the Frontiers of Man and Medicine by Harry Parker, Polluted Sex by Lauren Foley, and then there was one self-published book called Book of Hours by Letty McHugh. If I bought a physical copy of that book, it would have cost £35. So I didn't buy that, but I have bought the PDF of that book and I'm going to be printing that and then I will read it because I do want to read all of the books on this long list. So the long list consists of 1 novel, 2 short story collections, 1 novel, 2 poetry collections, 1 short story collection, and 4 non-fiction books. So I'll be reading all of them and I will come back to you when I have something to say about whichever book I decide to start reading first. But for now, Mr. M and I are going to go for a walk along the Thames. So please do join us and I will be back with you very soon. lovely walk. We'd done the beginning of it before and the very end, but never the middle bit. And there's something about walking along to Canary Wharf and looking at it that makes me think I'm not in London anymore. It almost seems like New York to me. And I know I'm saying that as someone who's never been to New York, and maybe Americans are watching this clip going, yeah, it didn't look like New York at all. But in my head, okay, in my head, it looks a bit like New York, I think, because it's a lot newer and quite separate from the rest of the city. Anyway, it was a nice time. I'm gonna put my tea down. I just wanted to pop on here quickly to thank the sponsor of today's video, who is Serious Readers. I've been working with them for about 18 months now, and if you have been around here a while, you know how much I love them. They are a UK-based company. They make all their Serious lights here. Their Serious lights are reading lights, and this is one of them behind me. This is their high definition light. It's a floor lamp. You can get it wireless or corded. I have the corded version, but I still find it super easy to move around, and I tend to move it between the sofa, where I'm reading quite often, and also the dining table where we play board games. It's super handy for board games because, well, it would be anyway, but we haven't done the rewiring in this room, so I'm very grateful to have this. So they have technology built into their lights that they created, which mimics daylight as closely as possible. If I'm remembering correctly, it's called daylight wavelength technology, and I just love it so much. Part of my disability means that my corneas are affected. They are quite scratched, and I also have very dry eyes as well. And whilst this light can't help with any of that, doesn't change any of that, it does create the best reading environment for my eyes, which makes it more comfortable for me to read. You don't need to have a disability relating to your eyes in order to need a good reading light, but that's just my personal perspective. And if you're in the market for a reading light, they have an offer at the moment. It's the first sale that they have done on this range in 3 years, and they're offering £100 off a high definition light, and this sale is running for a month. You can use the code JEN25 or use the link in the description box down below as well. I love them, and I think that they're great. They started making lights because the owner's mum was losing her eyesight, and as I've mentioned before, their lights are so good that they are used in spaceships and submarines. Like, they are the best. So I love them. I would recommend checking them out. That code is there for you if you would like to use it. Thank you to Serious Readers for sponsoring this video. Now, tomorrow, Mr. M's family is having, let me try that again. Tomorrow, Mr. M's family is having a gathering. I think it's about 30 of them. We're not going because we're still not socializing indoors with people. I don't talk about this stuff anymore because it's been a long time, hasn't it? So, but yeah, we're still not doing that. I get on the tube sometimes wearing a mask, and I'll occasionally go into a shop wearing a mask as well, but I'm still not socializing indoors with people. But I'm sad that I'm not going to the gathering because obviously I haven't seen everyone in a very long time. So I thought what I would do, his mum is dropping off Lola here tomorrow morning because Lola doesn't like big crowds. So we are gonna get to look after Lola for the day, which is lovely. And I'm gonna make some cupcakes and some cinnamon rolls that his mum can take to the gathering. So I'm not there in person, and Mr. M's not there in person, but we are there in cake-based spirit. So I'm gonna make some baked goods, and then tomorrow we will be looking after Lola. So I will insert some clips of that. I'm sure that we'll take her on a walk and stuff. So here is that. Oh hi, can you tell by the lighting that it is quite late in the day? I just wanted to pop on here and say that I finished reading my first book, which is Shahd Alshammari's Head Above Water, forgot the title there for a second. This is a non-fiction book. I finished reading it last night and I really enjoyed it. This is partly told in the second person, and that's for a variety of reasons. Each section begins with Yasmin, who is Shahd's assistant in this writing process, but also friend and previous student. It begins with her going through Shahd's files and finding, say, quotes or pieces that she's written for journals and highlighting passages, and then Shahd responds to those quotes about the context for those things, or maybe things that she has learned or things she wants to say about it, memories. So it's written in the second person because she's responding to Yasmin, but also she is speaking to the reader. And I think that the second person also reflects the collaborative process of this book, a discussion of disability and care and or family, which is one of the main topics of conversation within this text. In this book, Shahd talks about being diagnosed with MS when she was a teenager. She woke up feeling numb in various parts of her body, and ridiculously she was made to drive to the hospital, which at the time she didn't realise how dangerous that was. She says, the brakes under my feet were fluffy, like there was no hardness to them, no presence except that they claimed they were there. Shahd grew up in Kuwait and her mum is from Palestine, and she's talking about the cultural response to disability as well and the shame that is tied up in that. Her dad, when he went to hospital appointments with her, would say that she was less disabled than she was because that's what he thought was important. The doctor said, what's wrong with her other than numbness? Nothing. She is as healthy as a horse, my dad replied with a hint of pride in his eyes. But that's not helpful to her because he's suppressing symptoms that she has that she needs assistance with. Likewise, she needs to get disability parking. Says, another pressing issue is my need for disability parking. I couldn't bring myself to ask my father to help me with this because I didn't want to embarrass him. He couldn't officially and publicly admit to having disability in his immediate family, let alone it being his daughter. Most governmental paperwork demanded a male figure to get the ball rolling. Women did not enter governmental spaces such as ministries, and if they did, they were likely to be ignored or pushed aside. And it was really interesting reading her discussions of teaching, which she goes on to be, she is a lecturer, and how that paralleled with Rebecca Tausig's book, Sitting Pretty, and what it's like to try and teach a class about, say, themes in literature such as disability when you're personally experiencing them yourself and you're having to navigate the ableism that presents itself in the room, along with any sexism as well, without feeling as though you need to use yourself as a teaching point in that moment. Another layer with this book too is when Shahd goes to the UK and she's studying there, and then she also has to deal with racism as well as ableism too. Just layers of stuff you would rather not be dealing with. Microaggressions make you feel bad. You feel a small raging fire start in your chest and it grows until you can't remember how it all started. There is a terrifying section in this book where doctors decide to do this, I don't know if it's untrialed, but it is not advised, it hasn't been tested properly, this method for getting stem cells into her body by removing the majority of blood from her body and then pumping it all back in. So she nearly dies, and she has this vision of chasing her younger self as she's passing out and nearly dying. It was very claustrophobic. I really love how this text is patchwork together. I'll read you another extract. Everything around us can be a hazard. I'm reminded of my mother making sure that the house was hazard-free when my baby sister was born. Everything was dangerous. I felt the same way every time I looked at my bedroom floor as I attempted to leave the room. I was afraid of wobbling, not just falling. There was a lot more to worry about than just falling. One eye was affected and all I could see was blurriness. Every time I wobbled, the floor began to shake, and as it shook, I knew the floor would win. We have this saying where we are utterly humiliated that means I wish the ground would split open to just devour me. I had never thought of it the other way round. It was humiliating to be devoured by the floor. And finally, this little extract here, which kind of sums up the premise for the book. So, here are the wounds as they relate to a language pieced together to help make sense of everything we feel but don't and can't label. Illness is a place of exploration, a paradoxical place of loss and gain. Relationships and human connection are all we keep with us. I think of selves as recycled, washed out, bent, brought forward again to witness life and then to narrate. this was a great start to this reading vlog, and I have now picked up Recovering Dorothy by Polly Atkin, which is another non-fiction book, and this is looking at the life of Dorothy Wordsworth, who was William Wordsworth's sister and was a poet in her own right. And lots is written about her, especially her relationship with William. But then weirdly, which I didn't know, and Polly talks about in the introduction to this book, all of her biographies end years before her death because she became disabled and she remained at home for I think the last 20 years of her life. And the way that biographers write about her, let me just find you some quotes that made me really, really angry. For instance, one biographer, Ernest de Selincourt, calls the last 20 years of her life posthumous life, as if she's already dead. That was in a biography from 1933, so you would hope that the closer we got to modern day, the more the attitude would change. Helen Derbyshire in 1958, another biography, called this period of Dorothy's life prolonged period of life and death. And then in 2008, a biographer commented on how when William married Mary, that was basically Dorothy's funeral, and that she'd been fossilized for us in her Grasmere journal as though she didn't really exist after that. It's so reductive and strange. So for a while, Polly didn't know that, for instance, Dorothy had written much, much more than is published widely, because people just got really weird about her being disabled and didn't want to engage with her content after that point. So that is a very interesting beginning, and I look forward to delving more into this, and we're going to get into the actual biography of Dorothy. And I wonder how much Polly is going to talk about her own life, or if she's only going to focus on Dorothy. I don't know. I don't know what format this book is going to take, but that's where I'm at with reading. And I think this evening I'm going to treat us and make us a Sunday roast, even though it's not Sunday, but I just really fancy one. And we've got some sprouts and we've got some haggis, veggie haggis. So I'm going to do that, and I will check in with you later. Hello, I was hoping to reach you in daylight, but here I am again at nighttime. To be fair, it's not actually nighttime, it's only 5 o'clock. There's not much light at the moment, is there? So I was probably hoping for a bit much, but I am here because I finished reading 2 books. So I finished reading Recovering Dorothy by Polly Atkin, which I mentioned at not at the beginning, at the end of the last clip. And I can't remember if I said before, but I have read Polly's poetry before and really loved it. So this is the first non-fiction book of hers that I've read. I don't know if it is her first non-fiction book, full stop. I don't know. Anyway, I've really enjoyed her poetry before. So I finished reading this, and this, as I said, is about the life of Dorothy Wordsworth, who is the sister of William Wordsworth. I really like the play on words in the title, Recovering Dorothy, as in finding her in all of the writings and discussions about her and trying to pinpoint who she really was, like recovering her out of this sea of texts and things that were incorrectly written about her, but also obviously the link with terminology relating to illness and recovery and how people expected her to recover. There are some extracts in here of letters between people who say that they are so sure that she's become ill because she has overexerted herself as a woman who likes to walk, and lots of very Georgian things like that. I think that I would have enjoyed this book more than I did. I still liked it and I appreciated it a lot, but I think I would really have loved it if I'd read it when I was at university. There was a course that I was doing, I think it was called Mad Women in Literature, I don't remember, but it was literature from the 1700s and 1800s, and we read Geraldine Dewsbury and Margaret Oliphant, who is in this book. And I feel like if you're really immersed in Georgian and Victorian writing, and you're very aware of other writers and their links with each other, because this is kind of like a who's who of writers. You know, we've got Wordsworth in here, obviously, but we've also got Coleridge, and we've got Oliphant. Later, we've got Woolf in this book writing about Wordsworth. I think there's something to delight in that, and I think if I'd read it when I was reading work by those writers, I would have had a greater appreciation for this, probably because I would have been able to contextualize it better. Not that this book doesn't contextualize itself, but I think I would have been able to map it out better across the history of literature, and that personally would have brought me more joy. This really is a book that is trying to pinpoint Dorothy Wordsworth at every point in her life and discuss her illness and disability and all of the pointers that can be found within her letters with regard to what her disability may have been and how it impacted her life and all of the misunderstandings that other people had about it. So in that respect, this book is quite dense when it comes to that, and it doesn't really touch too much upon her own poetics. It explores that a little bit. She was quite nervous to call herself a poetess, I think, because she was William's sister. But what is interesting, and what lots of people have noted in history, is that their beings, William and Dorothy, and their writings were inextricably linked. So he would read her diaries about nature and get inspired by her writings to write his poetry, and vice versa. She would read his poetry and then write letters about the outside world. So that's kind of fascinating, but I liked it. And if you are someone who reads a lot of Georgian and Victorian literature, because she dies just as the Victorian period is starting, then I think that you would really like that, and I would very much recommend it. I just don't tend to read as many classics these days. Then I read Hannah Hodgson's 163 Days. Again, I've read Hannah's poetry before and very much enjoyed it. I think that she's brilliant. And this is a poetry collection in two parts. So the first part is 163 days that she spent in hospital, and she's writing poetry in response to her medical notes that she requested after she left, and she includes the medical notes in here. And then the second part is a collection of just poems on their own. It was quite funny to me because I have my second poetry collection coming out later this year, which is called Please Do Not Touch This Exhibit. And last year I decided to request my medical notes from when I was a kid as a form of processing and also out of interest. And it is such a strange thing to read through notes that are about you, but of course you were never the intended audience for them. And I, in my book, have used a couple of quotes from the medical notes, not as extensively as Hannah has here, it's very different, but have used some of those quotes to, I guess, help form a timeline in some of my own poems and some of the terminology that is used, because my notes are from when I was a kid in the 80s. I forgot the decade for a second. When I was a kid in the 80s, and I was having dozens of operations and I was bouncing between so many different doctors, and there's a letter and it says something like, "Dear, doctor, I refer this deformed baby girl to you," in brackets, no name yet, because I didn't even have one. And within that document they were already mapping out my entire life and all the surgeries that I would need, even though I didn't have a name yet. And then they scheduled in an operation for when I was 12 weeks old. But there's lots of discussions of deranged skeletons and what an interesting specimen I am. And something that really made me laugh was when, I think it was when I was 3 years old, one of the notes says that interestingly Jennifer has a younger sister who is completely normal. And for anyone who is a sibling out there, I think anyone reading a description of their sibling as someone who is completely normal would very much want to disagree with it, and I disagree with that statement entirely. Anyway, it is kind of traumatic to look back on notes, especially I think when your memories of those events are so filtered, by which I mean obviously I was a newborn at that stage. I don't have memories from when I was that old. I have memories from when I was 18 months, 2 years old and onwards, and those are all very dingy and dark and twisted, and you know, it's weird to help contextualize your emotional memories with medical notes. And in Hannah's case, she's using notes of a period that she mostly remembers because this was very recent, and it's interesting to use medical notes as a juxtaposition between what the medical team are seeing of you and then how you are feeling about something. And there are many points in Hannah's collection that perfectly illustrate that. So at one point she is writing about what she can see around the ward because she has been asked to walk around the ward, and all she can hear is people's distress and seeing other people in difficult circumstances, and she writes snippets of that. Patients line the corridors, wood rotting from the inside out. We're trying chemo one last time. This mum, immaculate makeup, wishes she could smudge foundation over the tumour, take her child home. She's got a head injury. We don't know if, we aren't sure if, we don't know if outside A&E, this dad's circles stuck on a roundabout of shock. And then it goes on. And then the medical note at the bottom is, I have encouraged Hannah to mobilise around the hospital in the hope of stimulating her bowel. You know, it's like, I've encouraged her to do this for her benefit, but actually what it's done is traumatized her in a different way because she has been confronted with people going through not very nice scenarios. So yes, this is kind of a love letter to medical professionals who were paying a lot of attention and trying to help and nurture her in any way they can, and then also contrasting that with some people who were treating her who berated her for not trying hard enough to get better and thinking that she was faking some of her symptoms and all of this stuff. The bullying and misogyny that is quite prevalent in medical places, and how that's difficult to navigate when you're a person who is relying on other people to try and help you feel better. I've underlined some lines that I particularly enjoyed, such as this: his name rising like bread in my conscience. I love that one. There's a quote where she's talking about her friends. Oh yeah, she said, school friends will remember me like Christmas decorations at the end of term. I just thought that was beautiful. Really appreciated this collection. As I said, I've read and loved Hannah's work previously, so this was no surprise to me. And one of the poems at the end was a list of things that I thought worked extremely well in poetic form. I've never held a heart or even seen one beating. I have never performed an autopsy, but I have whispered my fear of a neighbour to a nurse before she drugged her. I haven't eaten birthday cake in 6 years, but no grapefruit interacts with most drugs. I've never edited the past on purpose, but have placed myself within still images in order to stay around. I have never witnessed a sheep give birth, but have seen a mother with her womb inside out. I have never driven a family car, but I have driven a tractor. I think that was my favourite poem in the collection. That's just a snippet of it. It's much longer than that. Yes, love that. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next book, and I'll check in with you when I have done so. I have some sprouts left over from when I made the roast the other day, so I'm going to try and cook up some kind of noodles with sprouts and sesame seeds and spring onions and miso. Yes, I'm going to basically rummage around the fridge and see what leftovers we have and make something out of it. So let's go do that. Hi, it's the weekend. We've just been out for a very blustery walk. I didn't film any of it because there was sideways rain. Sideways rain is my least favourite, but I feel invigorated and slightly cold, which is why I still have my scarf on. I have been cooking bolognese, and you can't see, you can't see, I'll do a cutaway, in the rice cooker, because you can use the rice cooker as a slow cooker, which is very cool. So that has been cooking in there while we're out. I'm going to let it cook for a bit longer. Mr. M and I are going to have, where is it? This. We're going to have this. We're going to share this. This is a Biscoff donut, a lotus donut. It's got lotus flavoured custard in the middle, which I picked up from our local bakery on the way home. So we're going to have that, have a cup of tea, get warmed up and play a game of Unlock. I've spoken about those before. They're at-home escape rooms. You download an app on your phone which serves as a timer and plays atmospheric music, and sometimes you have to use your phone to solve clues by taking a photo of something, or I don't know, there's just lots of clever stuff that it does, but it's mainly on a pack of cards and you're trying to solve a mystery. So we're going to do one of those right now while the bolognese cooks. And yeah, that sounds really cozy. So let's go do that. Hi, it is Sunday morning and it is sunny outside, which is exciting because it has been raining for days and days and days. So we're going to take advantage of that and go for a walk today. I mean, we went for a walk yesterday, but we got soaked. We'll go for a longer walk today and hopefully we'll not get soaked. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about two books that I have since read since the last time I spoke to you. The first of those is a non-fiction book, which is called Hybrid Humans. I think I said the subtitle wrong last time. I think I said Dispatches from the Frontiers of Man and Medicine, but it's Man and Machine, and it's by Harry Parker. And I hadn't made the connection until I started reading this. I haven't read Harry's work before. He does have another book out called Anatomy of a Soldier, but I had seen him talk at the Durham Book Festival in 2016, which is a whole 7 years ago now, which that's a long time. I was their vlogger in residence, so I filmed a lot of the events that were going on, as well as doing events of my own. And I think, if I can find a clip, I'll put it on the screen, but he was talking along with other authors who had been shortlisted for the, is it the Gordon Burns Prize? I hope that I've got that right. Anyway, I had heard him talk before, but I had never read his work, and now I have. This is a non-fiction book about technology and humans, which you may have guessed from the title. Harry was a soldier and he was injured in Afghanistan. He now has 2 lower limb prosthetics. So he's coming to this from the point of view of someone who has an acquired disability. Part of it that really interested me was when he spoke to friends of his that had similar disabilities but would use assistive technology in very different ways. So for instance, he spoke to a friend of his, Jake, who started losing his sight in his teens but then went blind in his 40s, and he doesn't like using any kind of assistive technology on his phone when he's out walking. He doesn't want assistance navigating in that way because the sound is distracting to him, because he's used to using his hearing to help him figure his way around. Whereas another friend of his who is also blind loves using assistive technology and finds all of that really useful. So I like the nuance in here that's explored in how certain technologies are helpful to certain people and not to others, and how obviously that is a case-by-case basis type of thing. There's also a massive difference in the disability community in the way that disability is talked about generally between those with acquired disabilities and those like me who were born with disabilities, because obviously those are quite different things. And at the beginning of the book, Harry talks about the word disability and his association with it, how he feels about it, and how because of the technology that he uses in his legs, he feels as though that technology almost compensates for his disability, negates it, so he would prefer the term hybrid human or cyborg. But by the end of the book, once he's spoken to lots of other people and thought about it some more, he's realised that that emotion is just massively tied up in internalized ableism, and of course he'll always be a disabled person and that label is fine too. He's just also someone who uses technology and could adopt the term hybrid human if he wanted to as well, and that would be fun. So I liked how open he was talking about internalized ableism, because I think whilst there's a lot of shame that can come with disability because of the way society talks about disability, there's also a lot of shame within the disabled community about the way we choose to talk about ourselves and language, and if we don't, own it enough. So I like that he, talked about all of those different things, because we're all figuring everything out all of the time. I also enjoyed how he spoke to such a wide variety of people in this book, which meant that sometimes he was speaking to people who were involved in technologies that he didn't know much about, and it felt like you were journeying with him to learn stuff. And then sometimes he was talking about things that he had a great amount of knowledge about, and you felt as though you were in safe hands learning with him. So yeah, and you know how sometimes when you read a book, there's a particular sentence that just jumps out to you. There was one scene where he's talking about being in hospital and learning how to use prosthetics and struggling to see how that's going to be helpful to him in the long term, because it's very new for him, and he sees someone who's also an amputee walking around on his prosthetics and it being like nothing to him, and he sees him and he says it's like being a year 7 looking at a year 11 and just thinking, I'm never gonna be that grown up, you're so cool, and then wanting to track that person down and be friends with them, which he actually does. So I thought that image was really great. Something that is quite uncomfortable in this book is how he explores the way non-disabled people look at assistive technology, and how a lot of it is about wanting to become machines themselves, but because that's cool, rather than it would be added function in their day. And it definitely reminded me a lot of Lydia West's character in Years and Years, when she's talking about wanting to be transhuman, and how there's a strange disconnect, I guess. Like Harry speaks to people who are not disabled, who are talking about, inserting chips into bodies and integrating technology. But the way that he sees it, and the way a lot of other people see it, is that that kind of thing is so far away from being really useful. Like it exists and people use it, but having technology that you can take off when it breaks to repair is so much more helpful than having something that is, built inside your skeleton when it is not necessary to movement. It's just like an additional cool thing. Like that's so much more impractical, and it just is very obvious that the people who are creating these things and who are excited about it are not used to having bodies that break down, for want of a better word, or don't behave in the way that you expect them to. And their expectations of the way that bodies respond and react is very different, and is actually their downfall. And also touches on topics on how disability technology is so brilliant, especially when it is being innovated by disabled creatives, because they come up with obviously the most, on the whole, useful and practical things, because they're coming at it from a lived perspective. And he goes to this fair where he meets all of these amazing disabled engineers, and it's just fantastic. And he also has an interview with Sophie, who runs the alternative, I think it's called the Alternative Limb Project, who I've been following on Instagram for a while, so that was fun to read. Where was I going with that? I don't remember, but basically I'm just saying it was really interesting, the juxtaposition of non-disabled people talking about assistive technology in a I want to be superhuman kind of way, and disabled people talking about technology in a very practical, much more in tune with their bodies kind of way. I thought that was really cool. I would encourage you to read all the way to the end when you read this book, because Harry definitely has a lot more self-reflection at the end of the book related to like his particular circumstance, as I said, his relationship with the word disability and how that's changed, his relationship with privilege when it comes to, you know, gender and race and all of that stuff. I thought that the ending was very important to the rest of the book and isn't always threaded through at every stage. So yeah, I liked it as a whole. And then I started reading Polluted Sex by Lauren Foley. This is a short story collection which is published by Influx. Lauren is an Irish writer, and unfortunately this one just isn't for me, and that's fine. You know, we're gonna find books in our lives that speak to us and some that don't so much. I've read quite a few stories in here. I love the voice that she writes in, and often she'll write phonetically. And what's quite funny is that I find that there's quite a lot of similarities between Geordie and Irish dialect. So when I was reading some of it, I was imagining it in Geordie in my head instead of in Irish. I think because, you know, we call our mums mam and other phonetically similar things. Anyway, these are mostly coming of age stories, but reading this, it feels like a writer who is very excited to experiment and explore lots of different ways of writing, which is really fun. And I actually quite liked the flash fiction / prose poetry elements. There are also some parts that are written with different fonts. There's even some that is written out as music. Personally, I think it felt a little bit too hectic for me. It was someone who wanted to explore and try lots of different things, which is really exciting. But I think it meant that I couldn't settle into this book as much as I would have liked to. So I'm going to pass this one on to somebody else, because I'm sure that somebody else will very much enjoy it. So as I said, we are going to go for a walk today. We're going to do the Dollis Valley Walk, which we've never done before. I think it's a 10-mile walk, and it's still in London, but it's further north. So we need to get the tube a couple of stops, well, actually several stops north. But it is quite funny how if you go just a little bit further out, the scenery is just massively different. I think the beginning of this walk is going to feel like we're in the countryside, even though we're going to still be this side of the, you know, North Circular. It's been raining a lot, so I think it's probably going to be quite a muddy walk. We're following a stream. I don't think it's one of London's lost rivers because it's still above ground. There are still some lost river walks that I want to do in the future. But anyway, we're going to do this walk, and I will insert footage of that here. Hello, I'm chasing the light again, so I'm huddled by the window so I can talk to you about 2 more books. So I have now read Year of the Tiger by Alice Wong. Many of you have probably, if you haven't read it, you've probably seen it. The book Disability Visibility, which is a fantastic anthology that Alice Wong edited, and she is the founder of the Disability Visibility Project, which is a much wider project with a website and a podcast, and then the book emerged out of that. So definitely go and check out that anthology if you haven't read it before. She's just absolutely wonderful. So this is a book. I thought it was going to be a memoir. Basically, I hadn't read anything about it when I purchased it last year because I was like, Alice wrote it, I want to read it. That's it. But it's not really a memoir. It's like a scrapbook. It's a disability scrapbook with some transcripts from some of the Disability Visibility podcast. There's some amusing cartoons that have been made to insert some lighter things in here. So we've got this artwork on cat life, and then we also have bits about Alice's life too, and then interviews that maybe she's had with members of her family, photographs, even memes that she liked from Twitter. So it really is a patchwork of stuff. And even within this patchwork, there are certain topics that she revisits. And sometimes I think you can read an essay collection where someone's written about topics for publication, and then when they're put together in one book, you realise that they repeat certain things because they haven't edited it thinking of it as a book, and that can be really frustrating. But in this book, Alice revisits a couple of things. There's not many reoccurring specifics, but occasionally she will come back to a certain topic and revisit it, but it's in different formats. So for instance, in here there'll be an essay that she's written for publication on a certain thing, and then she'll talk about that same event in a podcast with a friend, but she'll talk about it in a completely different tone to the way she wrote about it for publication. And it's interesting how we can recall and revisit events as disabled people depending on the audience that we're communicating with, the message we're trying to get across, and also what we think that particular audience can handle, or even what we can handle on one specific day. You know, maybe one day we'll want to talk about traumatic things, maybe another day we'll want to make a joke out of everything because that's how we're dealing with life that day. So I really liked how that was reflected in the way that this book was put together. I thought that was very clever. I think that what is great about this book is that it's a very accessible book that is talking about very important things but doesn't take itself too seriously. That's essentially what Alice says at the beginning of this book. Like, I'm just a person, you're just a person, we're going to sit down, we're going to have a chat, all right? Like, it feels like the kind of book that you could hand to someone who was wanting to learn more about disability activism, disability justice, and was maybe feeling intimidated by other books on those topics. Unnecessarily perhaps, but was maybe feeling like, oh, I don't really know where I should start with all of this. This, along with disability visibility, would be a great entry point to these topics. And in the last clip, I mentioned how there was one sentence in Harry's book that really stood out to me. And the sentence that stood out to me in this book was a moment in a podcast where Alice was talking about how disability and care work are like choreography and how it changes all the time. And I just thought that image of choreography was brilliant. So yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. Now, I said there was one book from this long list at the beginning of the video that I had already read and that I would talk about it at some point in this video. And that book is Chouette by Claire Osketsky. And I read this, it was our Patreon book club pick. I read it in March last year. And like, I write books and I review books. I grapple with books every single day. And this doesn't happen to me very often, but occasionally there will be a book that I come across. I actually can't even think of the last time this happened, but there will be occasionally a book that I come across that I have such a strong emotional response to, that means I feel like I can't review this book properly or effectively. I just can't get past my immediate response to it. And this is one of those books. So this is written from the point of view of someone who had a disabled child, a disabled daughter, a non-physical disability, but writes about it through this extended metaphor of physicality. So in this book, it's about a mother who gives birth to an owl baby, and it's about the public and her family's response to this owl baby and the love that she has for this child, but also how difficult everything is. I think essentially I felt deeply uncomfortable reading this book because I was the disabled child, you know? Like, I felt this book is not for me. This is a book for non-disabled parents, and that I shouldn't see it. That was basically how I felt about it. It made me really upset. It made me feel And this is nothing on the author at all. Like, I'm just saying these are my completely projected feelings. I just felt that if my mum had written this book about me, it would destroy me. That was kind of how I felt. And again, nothing on Claire. And I know that there are lots of interviews with her and her daughter where her daughter's saying that she really likes this book. So like, this is just about me and not about the book, which is the problem, because now I can't get past that. This book is just not for me. It's not. And it was interesting reading it for Patreon and then talking about it, because there were lots of disabled people who were commenting saying they felt the same way. It made them feel really deeply uncomfortable. But again, not in a way that, oh my God, this book shouldn't exist, but just in a, this is about us and it's very othering. And that's just deeply uncomfortable. And saying this in a video also makes me feel deeply uncomfortable, if you can't already tell. That's it. I think we should just move on from that book and move on to the next one. I don't have any other like B footage from now to insert here because it's the working week, but let me insert 30-second footage of a walk that we went on when it was still snowy. So I'll insert that here and then I'll come back to you when I've read the final book in the long list. We have the orange light once more. Hi, I have finished reading the 8th book on the Barbellion Prize long list. This is the one that I said was self-published, so I think that Letty got a grant to write this and then she put it out into the world herself. So I bought the PDF and printed it so that I could read it. So this is Book of Hours, an almanac for the seasons of the soul. And this is part, I was gonna say diary. It's not really a diary. Memoir, there we go. That's the word I was looking for. My goodness, my brain today. Part memoir, and then also has some photographs in as well, and of found objects, and then a few poems as well, and notes that Letty had written to herself. So Letty has MS and she had a relapse at the very beginning of the pandemic. So for the first month or so, she went into relapse, and that's kind of framed almost as like a mini lockdown of its own. She would have been in lockdown anyway, but she was in extra lockdown because she was also very sick and was at home. And it's her writing about that and searching for faith in things and in herself. She turns to the format of a Book of Hours and writing about saints, and starts to do that herself, wondering if she has faith in her writing and I guess faith in her body, faith in society as the pandemic continues and all of that stuff. I did that thing where I picked up my cup of tea, but it is too hot to drink, so I'm just putting it down again. It's a lot about the Northeast, which is where I'm from, so I have a particular soft spot for that. She's talking about Lindisfarne and the monks on Lindisfarne, and some of it is just deeply funny as well as being very touching. I would say that this is the disability version of Inside by Bo Burnham. That's my elevator pitch for it for you. You are so welcome. So now we've read all of the long list, and I managed to read it all before the shortlist was announced, which is going to be announced on the 25th of January, I think. So I'll link the Barbellion Prize socials in the description box down below if you want to keep an eye on what books are going to make the shortlist. But I should do a ranking for you, shouldn't I? I've got them on the floor down here. So let me pick those up. All right, so from least favorite to, actually, do we need to do that? I don't think we need to do that. Let me just pick a shortlist. I think my particular shortlist of 4 from these 8 books. So I think it's tricky because I definitely have a top 3. So my top 3 are Head Above Water by Shahd Alshammari, 163 Days by Hannah Hodgson, and then Book of Hours by Letty McHugh. And I think, depending on what day of the week you asked me on, my 4th would either be Year of the Tiger by Alice Wong or Hybrid Humans by Harry Parker. They're both so different. I mean, all of these books are quite different because they're across different genres and mediums and all of that stuff. But yeah, I don't know. These ones I also really enjoyed. My favourite out of these three, Book of Hours, 163 Days and Head Above Water, I think it's probably between these two, between Hannah and Shahd's books, but I don't know. Again, if you asked me on a different day, it would probably change. But roughly, these ones are my favourites. There you go, these ones are my favourites, and I'm very glad to have read these books. I always love following a prize because I read things that maybe have been sitting on my shelf a while and I've been meaning to get to, and it gives me the push to read them, and then it also means that I read books that I probably wouldn't have picked up otherwise. So that's always fun too. I would love to know if you have read any of these books, whether you have followed the Barbellion Prize. I have lots of different videos recommending books specifically on disability and disfigurement if you're looking for more recommendations in this area. I'll link that playlist in the description box down below. Thank you very much to Serious Readers for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check them out. That link is also in the description box down below too. If you are new to my channel and you like this video and you would like to subscribe, that would be very lovely. And if you enjoy my content and you would like to consider supporting me on Patreon, that would be very kind. That's linked in the description box down below. Support on Patreon means I can keep making free content for everybody, and also means that it funds my time making everything accessible and all of that stuff. So yeah, there we go. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you're all doing okay, and I will see you for another video next week. Sending love. Bye.